In 1922, German expressionist cinema frontier Hendrik Gallind, who previously did the silent horror flick The Golem, adapted Bram Stoker's 1897 gothic horror novel Dracula. However, he did not attain the copyrights of the adaptation, therefore had to make drastic creative changes with a strong German undertone to cater to the domestic market. Nosferatu, a symphony of horror, directed by Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau, would eventually be one of the most celebrated silent era films and many regarded as the best European film for the longest time, and was instrumental in horror filmmaking since its premiere. Despite legal tussles with the Stoker household, which led to many copies of the film to be destroyed, some copies remained and were able to be disseminated to the rest of the world, leading to the zeitgeist and influence the movie had inculcated. The word Nosferatu was presented as an anarchic Romanian word, synonymous with vampire, and was used in Bram Stoker Dracula. It was the title Gallind used that somehow resonated with audience for the years that followed. Max Schreck, personification of the memorable Count Orlok, was the template for nightmares as much as Bela Lugosi Dracula. The hollow eyes, the oddly shaped cranium, those sharp incisors, the slender limbs and those pointy fingers certainly were visuals that were emblemed in the minds of the audience and a symbol of fear of vampirism. Orlok, of course, led to many homages in literature, movies, and TV series in the decades that followed. This was my very first time watching a silent era horror film, and I would say Murnau and his production designer, occultist Albin Grau, brilliantly created a spooky atmosphere, and it did not look that dated a good 100 years later. Werner Herzog is a well-faceted German director who made many classic movies that lead the new German cinema since the 1970s, and was later on an award-winning documentarian. He decided to remake Nosferatu, which he proclaimed to be the best German movie ever, and was excited to do his homage called Nosferatu the Vampyre in 1979. A German-French co-production, Herzog created a solid feature which melded Murnau's silent classic with actual characters' names, as Bram Stoker's Dracula was by then in public domain. The movie elegantly filmed in the Netherlands and Czechoslovakia. The performance of Klaus Kinski as Dracula, Isabella Adjani as Lucy Harker, and Bruno Ganz as Jonathan Harker really made this memorable gothic horror feature. Kinski, a longtime collaborator of Herzog and a classic case of a method actor, played his rendition of Orlok with a bit more sadness, beside eliciting fear in audience. I really enjoyed Adjani's damsel in distress, who was instrumental in the climactic end. There was a sense of decadence in the final act, when the town was under siege with the plague, and the collective resignation to fate that drove Lucy to make that ultimate decision. Adjani, who would crank up her manic performance in Possession after this movie, gave a performance to empathize with, similarly with Gunn's Jonathan. I don't know if I was alone when I felt that the final part with Jonathan and Van Helsing after the demise of Dracula in Harker's household, when he demanded whatever left of the town's law enforcement to arrest Van Helsing, was meant to provide levity in the end. I had caught up both movies prior to watching Robert Eggers' 2024 remake of Nosferatu, before I realized there was a 2023 scene-for-scene remake from director David Lee Fisher, starring Doug Jones as Orlok, which of course was under my radar. Robert Eggers focused a lot on Ellen Harter's haunting and created a backstory of Ellen having recurring nightly encounters with an unknown supernatural being, leading her to having seizures and trance-like states. This was very much highlighted in the trailers for the marketing of the movie. There was an occultist undertone in Eggers' reworks and created the mythical feel of the plot from the onset. There was an elaborate but deliberate focus on Thomas Harter leaving his wife Ellen under the care of his wealthy shipbuilder friend Harding and his family. The dichotomy of Thomas' Carpathian adventure and Alan's serial haunting for the main body of the plot meant the key characters are required to deal with Alan's sufferings back in Wiesberg. The inclusion of the Harding children was also a Nau's choice, especially with the notable things the girls exclaimed to their parents at the start. The part with Thomas and the Romani people prior to the encounter with Count Orlok was something that piqued my interest. That key interaction between Orlok and Thomas, followed by the haunting our poor property agent suffered, illustrated Eggers' dexterity in molding an atmospheric horror film. I like the dynamics between Thomas, Professor von Franz, and Dr. Sievers as they battled the threat of Orlok as the whole town went kaput. It was not something we had in the earlier renditions of the story. Nosferatu had been a long brewing passion project for Robert Eggers, with he had planned to start production in 2015 after his maiden film The Witch. The aesthetic and the aura Eggers created in The Witch would easily transpose into the world of Nosferatu. However, due to sheer fate, Eggers had to delay this passion remake, and at the meantime, he created a human psychological monochromatic horror in The Lighthouse, and then the action Nordic epic The Northman, which demonstrated Eggers could stray away from the horror genre and still leave his mark. Those subsequent films helped to build up the gravitas for Eggers and sharpened his filmmaking craft and dealing with a bigger and more noteworthy cast, which worked wondrously. Eggers, who had done a stage reprisal of Murnau's classic silent film before becoming a theatrical director himself, would finally start production in 2023. Filmed in Barrandov Studios in Prague, which in some ways coincided with Werner Herzog with his filming location. Eggers, with the help of his talented production team, created such a beautiful movie with many scenes that would mesmerize the audience. In terms of all facets of his filmmaking, down to the musical score, costumes, and photography, I really did not have much to nitpick Eggers and his crew. Well, there's one major creative choice which we will talk later when we talk about the actors. The voyage Orlok took to Wiesberg would be noteworthy if we had not had a decent film called The Last Voyage of Demeter in recent years. I would take note of how the various directors showcased the plague that Orlok have brought to Wiesberg, while Murnau concealed it behind the narratives. Herzog went on the controversial route with the mistreatment of the rats, but I felt the decadence of the townspeople really added to the end of the movie and drove Lucy's motivation. Of course, Eggers focused more on Orlok's lure of Ellen into his possession on her own will, but the vermin spread was done exquisitely as well. Lily Rose Depp, offspring of Johnny Depp and French actress, model, singer Vanessa Paradis, took the role of Ellen Harter, one would conveniently say the protagonist of this rendition. Depp, who started her acting career in 2014 in Kevin Smith's Task, always felt like one of those Nepo babies trying to shake off their parents' shadows, and none bigger than Captain Jack Sparrow himself. I had not really kept an eye on the movies she was cast in, but I can safely say Nosferatu is her coming out party. Ellen was a much tortured soul by her pact with the devil since young, and during her husband's absence, she did not have it easy under the watchful eyes of her caretakers. The final part with her multiple confrontations with Orlok and under the guidance of Professor von Franz, a lot was anchored on Ellen's strength and tenacity, and Lily Rose Depp was able to give a solid performance all around. Nicholas Hoult played the role of Thomas Harter, who conventionally would be the tragic hero of the story. His portrayal was not too far off Gustav von Wangenheim in the 1922 original, but he amplified the physical scares, and I certainly enjoyed his turmoil in Orlok's castle. Fresh from playing Reinfeldt in the 2023 horror comedy of the same title, when he played Dracula's familiar with such strong desire to turn into the undead, but in the end had to vanquish his master, Hoult is just short of playing Dracula himself to complete the characters in the famed literature. Now let's talk about Dr. Eggman. Count Orlok. At this point, it was of little surprise that Bill Skarsgård would challenge himself into all types of roles that made him unrecognizable, and through his method acting to bring the character to life. He did such a competent job as Pennywise in It that could measure up to the incomparable Tim Curry. While it was a big shoe to fill that of Matt Strack and Klaus Kinski, the drastic change of the look of Olok somehow gave Skarsgård a free rein to mold his own version, and he put in such effort to undulate his voice for the role, which was a commendable effort. This was the only nitpick I have mentioned. With regards to the design of Count Olok, it was not that it failed completely, but Olok's signature design was synonymous with the lore of Nosferatu, and that it was distracting when Eggers stayed away from it. Speaking of Olok, Willem Dafoe, in his third collaboration with Eggers, once played Max Strack in 2000's Shadow of the Vampire as fictionalized account of the making of Nosferatu, a symphony of horror, when during production, the cast suspected the enigmatic Strack was a real vampire. As Professor von Franks, who was based from Abraham Van Helsing, I thought Dafoe kept it grounded and made the character highly likable when people in town scrutinized him for his interest in occultism. Another recurring collaborator for Eggers was Ralph Ineson as Dr. Sievers, and together with his role in The First Omen, I'm starting to enjoy seeing Ineson just sauntering around, reassuring people in his comforting stance. Aaron Taylor Johnson and Emma Corrin were important collaterals in the grand scheme of things as characters previously who were negligible. Corrin, for me, was the breakthrough talent in Deadpool and Wolverine as Cassandra, the sister of Professor Xavier, played Anna Harding, who helped a lot for Ellen to settle in her husband's absence, and was a decent supporting character, while Taylor's once again could be faulted to be overacting. Looking back, the extensive casting of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has spread to such an extent that 5 of the 7 main cast members here have all been featured in roles within that universe over the years. Nosferatu, I would safely say, would help bolster the reputation of director Robert Eggers as an auteur and continue to be the name to look out for in the horror genre, especially when he was targeting to make a werewolf movie next with his continual infatuation of gothic horror materials. However, when you compared with a masterpiece like The Witch, the novelty certainly was waning, as the story was too familiar in many previous incarnations. Still, I had a good time with the movie, and was atmospheric either watching in the theatre or in the comfort of your home. I am torn between a 7 or an 8, therefore this is a 7.5 out of 10 for me. My gosh, we are already 2 months into 2025, and I'm gearing for all the highly anticipated horror movies to be rolling out this year. Hope all of you shared my anticipation. Continue to support my channel by liking this video review and subscribe to the channel if you are new here. My previous review was Carl Mooney's Y2K, which was a coming-of-age horror comedy that is totally opposite to a movie like Nosferatu. So let's see if Nicholas Hoult would take on a role as a version of Dracula in the near future. Well, he did play a romantic zombie and a blue werewolf mutant no less.